Good evening, everyone, and welcome to an exclusive panel, 50 Years of Nelvana, a chat with the minds behind our childhood favorites by the folks at TAAFI and Nelvana, presented to you by Seneca College, who is our event sponsor. So we want to give thanks to them for doing that. This evening, we'd like to congratulate Nelvana for reaching such a milestone as its 50th anniversary, bringing high-quality animated content to audiences in Toronto, across Canada, and all over the world in over 180 countries. Please don't hesitate to check out Nelvana.com for more information on 50th anniversary celebrations. We would now like to take this time to acknowledge the land we gather on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We encourage you to reflect on the history, treaties, and traditional keepers of the land we inhabit. And now, we would like to introduce you to the panelists for tonight's event. Larry Jacobs, you're a series director at Nelvana now, but can you tell us a little bit more about yourself before this?
So I finished up at Nelvana just recently, but before this, I was out east working at DHX, and before that at Cookie Jar, which was run by one of the ex-owners of Nelvana. And before that, I was at Nelvana for 20 years. Anyways, a long time. So I was like one of the early founding animation people that went through all the great opportunities that Nelvana offered us, and became a director for the 10 to 15 years before I went out on my own around 2000. What was it? 2008, Pat, or around that?
I don't know.
2008 or 6.
Very good. Robin, you're an award-winning director at Nelvana. Can you tell us a little bit about your history?
Well, my history with Nelvana goes back a long way. I started in 1976 when Nelvana was on top of Bob's Coffee Shop on King Street. And since then, I've been with Nelvana for 3/4 of my career. I was an animator for 12 years, and then I became a director on Beetlejuice, and then I did some time at Disney, and then back to Nelvana, and all sorts of different studios, but mostly Nelvana, directing Ruby Gloom, and most recently Hotel Transylvania.
And next we have Pat Burns. She's a supervising producer. Pat, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in the industry and your connection to Nelvana?
Well, I got started in the industry by attending the first animation festival in Ottawa in 1976. And that just started my career in animation. Within 6 months of that, I was like, bam, I was off. And so I was down in Los Angeles, and I worked for Filmation in Hanna-Barbera. I went overseas for many years when the animation went overseas, and ran checking departments and things like that. But I came back to Nelvana in 1985 after a short stint on Rock and Roll, being a final checker, and that's another story. But yeah, in those days it was all cells. It was all cells that needed to be cleaned and polished and shot one frame at a time. I mean, it was a long process, and sometimes painful. But when I came back to Nelvana, I started in the production department. Oh, are you showing a cell?
Yeah, for those who don't know what a cell is.
Oh, that's right, I forgot. So when I came back to Nelvana, I started in the production department, and over the 20 years that I spent in Nelvana, I was a production supervisor. I was a producer at one point. I was a supervising producer, and then finally VP production and VP international production. And so yeah, and so that's my story of Nelvana. But of course, over the years, I've worked inadvertently for Nelvana. I still associate with everyone from Nelvana, and they've been a really solid animation family for me, and some of my best friends I made there at Nelvana. So was a great place to work.
Very cool. We're looking forward to hearing more of the stories as we get further into this live. Now, Eric, you are a vice president of IT and technology delivery. Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Sure, yeah. I didn't know I was working with Nelvana at the time, but my first job out of university was on a half-hour 3D animated production called The Incredible Crash Dummies. And that was really getting thrown into the fire because that was in 1992, and I think Reboot was the only other time somebody had attempted to produce long-form computer animation at the speed we were trying to produce it. Turns out later I found out that was a co-production with Nelvana. We left that company and started a company called Windlight Studios. And our goal in that company was to try to figure out how to do long-form 3D animation, because we were really, really fascinated by trying to solve, the technical and artistic conundrums that come from trying to wrangle that much data and the amount of time that you need to do it for television broadcast. And we ended up doing a couple of productions with Nelvana during the course of that company, and we grew closer, and eventually Nelvana decided to buy us, and they bought our company out, moved us up to Toronto, and we then built the 3D facility there and started. Our first show was Rolie Polie Olie with the Disney Channel, and then just kind of took off from there.
Very good. And now that you've heard a little bit from our panelists, we're going to play our first clip from A Cosmic Christmas.
We are equipped to identify, comprehend, and speak all languages known. Hello, how do you do? I am fine.
Oh, I'm fine too, I guess. Lucy?
Our scientists have recently detected, 2,000 years ago Earth time, in the 79th Mervent, a transitory celestial phenomenon of the Merbundian class.
Huh?
What Plutarch is trying to say is that in the heavens visible to many worlds, there appeared for a brief time a great star, which manifests itself in the heavens.
Oh, you must mean the Star of Bethlehem.
Star of Bethlehem?
That has no meaning.
Our mission is to search for the meaning of that star.
You must mean Christmas.
Again, thank you all for joining us tonight. A Cosmic Christmas from 1977 is now a Canadian classic. It was one of Nelvana's very first television specials, directed by one of Nelvana's founders, Clive A. Smith. It was also the first animated production from the studio. As you're all working on future projects, do you ever find yourselves using past projects from the vault for inspiration for current or upcoming projects? And I'll start this off with Robin.
Well, I always look at projects that I know about or I've worked on in the past, but most importantly, what other people have worked on. So with Cosmic Christmas, what was interesting to me was there was Clive was a terrific director and leader of that project, but there was another guy, Frank Nissen, who partnered with Clive for the visual look. And one thing that he brought to that particular project was a very interesting style of design for the main three spacemen, the cosmic wise men. He brought a really lovely, elegant design that really had sophistication to it. And he referenced ancient Egyptian culture to formulate that style. So there's an example of looking back. So if you talk about looking in the vault, well, there wasn't much of a vault then. We were just starting out. But certainly looking at everything that you've experienced and drawing from that was what Frank did on that show. So it was a very interesting project to work on.
Very cool. And Larry, how about yourself?
And I came in on the Devil and Daniel Mouse, which was the Halloween special.
Right. And we actually have several clips we can play from that production.
Did you say anything?
Who are you?
My card, pretty lady.
Devil May Care Music Production. Beelzebub president.
I like your style. Too bad you're not a singer.
Oh, but I am. I am a singer.
No fooling.
No, listen.
Fantastic. Different. According to our contract, at precisely midnight of the night of her greatest triumph, the party of the first part, that's you, agrees to render up her soul now and forevermore to the party of the second part. That's me. Shall we go?
No, it's not midnight yet.
So, I gave you a chance, and you beat the devil. Well, I've learned my lesson. From now on, no more Mr. Nice Guy!
And for me, coming right out of college and right into, I was an assistant animator at that point. It was a big eye opener, and I think the first 2 weeks I was working with Frank Nissen, who was animating. Was he animating the beast right off, or the devil right off the top?
Beelzebub. Yeah,
Anyways,
Beelzebub.
it was more than I could handle, because I was more of a cartoonist, more cartoony characters, and I'll never forget. I think Robin was actually in the screening room when Frank was going over this footage. Is on a flatbed, so the film's going through, horizontally, and Frank's got this dour look in his face, and he says, "I don't know who did the assisting on this, but he must have been a sleeping spastic." Anyways, that was my entry into the business.
Very good. And Eric, I'm assuming you also did not work on A Cosmic Christmas?
No, that predates me. Yep.
Right. But do you ever look back on it or other films from that era for inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, when I was going through university, one of our textbooks was The Illusion of Life, which is, gosh, I can't remember the guys' names now, the two animators from Disney, who basically laid down the rules of, wrote it up in form, captured everything that Disney was doing about how you do this. And we were trying to figure out how to apply all that to 3D animation, which was kind of stiff and rigid and lacked a lot of the life that 2D animation did at the time. And, that was certainly a Bible we certainly went to on almost everything when we were trying to figure out how to animate our characters better, do a better job to make things look, more lifelike and more realistic. So yeah, we certainly used, when we were trying to do 3D, we certainly looked very heavily at 2D animation to figure out how to do it.
Absolutely.
That was an amazing book.
Yeah.
That was an amazing book by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson.
Thank you.
And at the time, that was the go-to reference for sure. It was amazing.
Yeah, I think it still is.
Real animation book, yeah.
Are we going to get to the point where they visited Nelvana? Am I jumping the gun?
No, that's not in our run of show right now. But if you want to throw that in there.
Oh well. Look at right over here.
And then he left.
All right, yeah. I went into my Disney shelf and look who I found.
Oh, awesome.
I got that. But here I have a set of Mickey Mouse ears, and they're signed by Frank and Ollie.
Oh, wow.
Wow, that's amazing.
And don't give my address out to anybody. But I got that done at the time in which Frank and Ollie came up to Nelvana. I don't know how Nelvana asked them, or I guess they just their way was paid up till Nelvana, and it must have been good weather in Canada at that point. So they came and
I hear we
did some lectures. Go ahead, Robin.
I heard that they came up because they were doing a trial of their tour, and we were the testing grounds for
Oh.
their lectures, much to our good fortune.
Mhm.
Very cool. All right, Eric, we're going to move on to another question for you. You started at Nelvana as a technical director and eventually climbed the ladder to be VP Infrastructure and Computing Services at Corus Nelvana. There's no doubt that Nelvana is constantly looking to expand their quality of animation. What were some of the major differences back then compared to now?
Well, I think the biggest one when I showed up was they were only using computers for ink and paint. So everything else was still being done by hand, and we, being 3D, it was all on computers. So we brought that to the facility, and then once we kind of got 3D established and working, we then turned to start working with the 2D part of the company and trying to figure out, could 2D be digitalized, which is a word I just made up, but basically trying to get those workflows into a digital form. And so during that time, we added the use of the Wacom tablets, and where you can draw directly onto the computer screen, and it'll never behave like pen and ink. Trust me, I heard that from everybody, but it was certainly, I think, good enough to do what we were trying to do. We brought in Flash at that time, which has since become Toon Boom, which was another approach to doing 2D animation, but entirely in the computer. I think that's the biggest transformation from when I got there in 1998. We showed up with our Silicon Graphics workstations, and we're kind of off in math land, and everybody found that kind of strange and weird. But over time, the computers kind of overtook the studio, and now you walk through and everybody's got a Wacom, and there's people sketch on paper, but a lot of the stuff is authored completely digitally, and I think that's the biggest change from the time I got there.
Mm-hmm. And Robin, you were an animator on A Cosmic Christmas. Looking back, how has animation changed for yourself, and what was it like working on one of Nelvana's first major projects?
Well, the animation, by comparison to today, is almost unwatchable. And the reason for that is that the technology today gives instant feedback, especially with timing. So with our work in the early days, we would work on pencil, we would flip paper to see how the motion was going, then we would send it in for a pencil test. We'd wait overnight while it was sent off to the lab, then it would come back the next day, and we would look at it and go, what was I thinking? Like, that's terrible. And so, but we would try and remember what we did, or, it was like so disjointed, the system way back then, that it was very hard to effectively do beautiful animation. So today, with the technology, the advancements are incredible. So in terms of technical animation, today is outstanding. But I must say that by drawing and just by really having to focus on trying to get it right, there was something about those days and that hand-drawn animation that brought, and the lack of limitations, because you're drawing everything. So if there's like secondary action, you have to draw it in. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't we have to re-rig the coat, or anything like that. So there was a freedom to it that I really loved. So
absolutely. And there's something gorgeous about 2D animation as well. Like, I look back on it and I love it. Like, just seeing that.
Yeah, me too.
That creative process there. All right. So we're going to take a little break, and we're going to have a look at another clip, which is Rock and Rule from 1983. It's a personal favorite of mine, and I know many Canadians and people around the world love this film. It's a unique piece of Canadian animation. So let's take a look at that.
look even more beautiful in person than on stage.
Better get some antiseptic on that before it festers.
Well, that's Omar, our lead singer, and
Enough
there's
about them. Let's talk about you. What did you think of my last album?
I loved it.
I bought it too. My gerbil uses it for a room divider.
It's evil.
Okay, we're back. Rock and Rule is one of the projects that Nelvana and Canadians should be very proud of. What was one of your favorite things about working on this project, starting with Pat and then Robin?
I think I learned. I had like a total. What is it? Like a really crush course in animation from doing that. I worked in series animation. I had been overseas in Korea and Taiwan and China and everywhere else, but that was serious stuff. But Rock and Rule was a real learning experience. And I came in as a final checker, where I was checking the cells and I was plotting the camera moves on paper, like math, which I'm really bad at. But anyway, I learned so much about timing and shooting and everything about movement from Clive Smith and all the directors and all the animators that were on that film. And it was a tough production because there were whole sequences that were animated and thrown out, and they were in another room and they were brought out and redone. Like, it never ended. But there was beautiful animation on that movie, and it's technically kind of perfect for that time and that technology. So I have great memories of working on Rock and Roll. It wasn't easy, but it was great learning experience.
Absolutely. It looks incredible. Even today it holds up. I have a video wall, and it is like on my video wall and one of the centerpieces over there. Robin, how about yourself?
I was heading up the mock crew, animating mock, and so I guess that was one of my favorite things. But what my biggest favorite thing about Rock and Roll was just the relationships between different departments. It was so accessible. So my favorite thing to do if I needed to break from drawing so much was I would go into the ink and paint department, which was, to me, the most interesting people, because it was a collection of misfits who were essentially painting cells. And so they weren't animators. Usually they were musicians or fashion people, and they needed a gig. And so I just found it refreshing that I could hang out with people who did something different. And I found it very engaging. And as Pat touched on, you could learn so much about different areas like camera. The camera department was really bizarre. Pat, remember that their first computer, they had a computer that was like 5 refrigerators big, with little lights blinking all over it. We thought it was so futuristic. And it was...
they built their own multiplane.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Camera, like their first multiplane, they built it. It was crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy. And so it was so innovative, the whole approach to how to get these bizarre effects to this story that required, it was sort of an apocalyptic futurism that we were going for in the look. And so many creative forces came out and were listened to and contributed to the project overall. So it was really wonderful to see that collaboration of so many different people and departments. So it was a wonderful, wonderful project to work on.
Absolutely. And for people who don't know, a multiplane camera is where you have different layers of glass with the cells that are put on it. And then say you've got a background that's moving, you'll move that on pegs underneath the characters. And so and it was this revolutionary thing that I think Disney came up with back in the day, and then other studios started to replicate. But I mean, the amount of technological prowess you'd need and math to get everything right, so you're moving everything at the right frame, is just like, it's next level and it's very difficult, which is why a lot of people just didn't do it. And Larry, how about yourself?
I think my experience, a lot of people's experience on rock and roll would have to be summed up with flying by the seat of your pants. The company had never done anything so big before, and there was a lot of emphasis put on technological stuff because at the time, but Star Wars was coming out in the theaters, and so there are a lot of things that were going to be compared to it. They did bring in all this computer stuff, and at one point, I'm pretty sure, don't quote me on this, hold it, I am being quoted, but a lot of that computer stuff was actually set up in the computer room to impress some money people that were coming in. And so it was a bit of a show. Pat's like going, no, Larry, don't go there. So it was like smoke and mirrors. It looked fantastic, but I think in the end, a lot of that stuff that we thought were being done on computers in the computer room was still being done by hand and frame by frame, like moving it frame by frame. And I'm pretty sure that multiplane system was still set up with coffee cans between the levels. And I think somewhere that the most outstanding background was the Ohmtown, which was the city that this was taking place in.
Oh yeah.
And how big was it? Like 6 feet by 8 feet long? It
was
the biggest background ever. And they had little tiny cars that were going to go along these pathways on the background, right? And I think that they were trying to hook them up to motors, so they were
servo motors. Servo.
So they do like one
right?
step.
Servo motors. Yeah. So I think actually the Russians that came back, that they were going on like this. So they scrapped that.
Oh no, the car's going in the river.
Right. You're right. They would go over the embankment and then go back and forth over that. So they ended up doing that frame by frame, moving it by hand, right? So I guess they probably had a dozen people in there. Okay, Larry, I wasn't part of it, but so-and-so, you take care of car 1, you take care of car 4, but like that.
Yeah.
That background exists somewhere. But for me, animation, I was still learning, and I was like still more of a cartoony animator, and it was very realistic animation going from our holiday specials to going to a feature. And I was moved on a team where John Celestri was my supervising animator, and he really broke me down and made me draw very realistic stuff. And John was famous for creating spacing charts that looked like this. Larry, this is my drawing here, and this is my drawing there. There are your keys. And Larry, you do all these drawings in between. So as much as that was terrifying at that time, it really taught me a lot. So it was a great opportunity to work with John and with Greg Duffel. Greg Duffel also. Well, thankfully Greg Duffel was more cartoony, so his stuff was more fun to work on than the realistic stuff for me.
Yeah, I think Richard Williams has an illustration in his book, The Animator's Survival Kit, and it has an illustration about animators that do that. It has 1 foot kind of coming in say, let me see my fingers. There's one foot coming into frame here, and the other foot is like leaving the frame here. And they're like, okay, just do everything in between.
Yeah. The simple stuff.
So overall, I think, Rock and Rule was a very expensive training ground for a lot of people at Nelvana, and it was a fantastic experience.
Mm-hmm. No, it's absolutely incredible, and it's a classic favorite by so many. And Rock and Rule has become a worldwide phenomenon since then. And looking back, and this question, I'm going to start with you, Eric. What do you think made this film become a bigger hit after its release?
I think people saw the passion, the attention to detail, the attempting of something that had not been attempted before that. I think it came through in the story and the visuals. There's a lot to look at, and I think people picked up on that for sure.
Mm-hmm. And Pat, how about yourself, kind of being at the ground floor and then seeing it kind of take off?
Well, I'm a bit fuzzy on the details of the release, but it was not a good one. It was very limited. I think it was one theater in Chicago. I'm sorry, I don't know all the details, but it never got its day in the sun, and it kind of disappeared for, gosh, I don't know, 10 years. But meanwhile, there was a cult following, and then it just sort of came into its own. Like, honestly, in the last 10 years, people are word of mouth. Everybody's got copies, and I've got my copy. Because it really is, as I mentioned earlier, it's technically perfect for a 2D film with really limited effects, often which were hand drawn and not computerized. So I think true animation people really appreciate that. And the characters are great. The characters are real characters who are very grounded, and you can identify with them and you know who they are. And it's funny, and anyone can tell you who worked at Nelvana on the film. We started the film without a finished script. We never do that, but and it had several different endings. But
and titles,
yeah. But at the end of the day, it holds up because the story is good. It's funny, and the characters are rich, and even the music. I was gonna say, Harry, Earth, Wind, and Fire. Like it doesn't feel dated. So
yeah, let's not forget the music. Lou Reed also.
Oh yeah, Lou Reed, yeah.
Who I won't mention any names, but somebody who went to the record of Lou Reed in New York asked him whether he could sound more like Mick Jagger. Which
I know who you mean.
And how did you hear that one over?
How did I hear that?
Oh, I'm sure he loved the idea. Oh, I love that.
Here, let me try.
Yeah. And Larry, how about yourself? How do you think that this kind of like it started out slow and then it's become kind of a worldwide phenomenon now as a film?
Right. Well, yeah, it did disappear for a while, and I wondered about. I think a lot of it was the music, might have been something that helped bring it back also, because all those people became really more important as they became more historical figures, whereas they're more kind of the music wasn't pop culture, but they're at the time that's what the pop culture was Lou Reed and Earth, Wind, and Fire, and that's how they chose those guys. And Deborah Harry. It was what a phenomenal collection of people somebody chose. I don't know who made those choices. Pat, Robin, do you know who made those choices?
I don't know. I would think it would be Clive.
Yeah, I would
probably be a major force behind that.
Yeah. And then Robin, as an animator who worked on the film and kind of saw it not get a major theatrical distribution at the time of release, but then to get appreciated by people after the fact, how does that feel as an animator who worked on it? And I'm assuming you kind of poured your heart and soul into it, as most animators do.
Well, I think everybody poured their heart and soul into Rock and Rule. And so when it had such a terrible release, everybody was heartbroken. And then when it came back, it is gratifying. It's really gratifying to know that people appreciate it and just see how beautiful a film it is. So it is it's really nice that it did come back eventually. But man, I'll tell you, shortly after that, it was really tough, and I'm sure it was especially tough for the founding members of Nelvana. But somehow they managed to keep the studio afloat.
Yeah, as like our artists and animators all kind of invested in our lives at Nelvana, it was worrisome. Like, oh, what's our next job going to be? You know, we had houses and families and pet dogs.
Yeah.
But Robin's right. You know, the original owners somehow found stuff for the studio to be reinvented, which was series work that we got into. Anyway, I think like one of the first stuff wasn't that the Star Wars series that we not the series, but we did the special also.
We did the special.
Maybe that's another question and answer period.
I think that's a whole nother live chat. I think that whole piece for sure.
I wanted
Chewbacca in the kitchen.
I wanted also to add that, you know, at the time we were doing rock and roll, that in Montreal they were doing heavy metal.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So there was a bit of competition happening between the two cities because, you know, Montreal had a pretty good animation industry happening, as did Toronto. So we would hear back and forth from friends, and we were all going, "Whoa, what's going to be a better show to work on?"
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, it's crazy, and now they're both classics, and they're both Canadian. And it's pretty incredible. All right, thanks for your thoughts on that, folks. We're going to take a little clip now and watch it. It's Rolie Polie Olie from 1998, and then we'll be back.
Morning, room. A banana spot. You sleep tight, Spot? Me too. Up and at 'em, Olie. Okie dokie, Mom. Olie! Morning, Zoe.
All right, we are back. So, Nelvana has worked on some of the most iconic shows of all time, with content seen in over 180 countries across the globe. Rolie Polie Olie is part of those achievements, receiving a Gemini and a Daytime Emmy Award. Pat, with your work as a producer, what do you think contributed to its worldwide success?
Well, I think that it's just the fact that it was actually a CG show that was animated and was stretch and squash, and it was beautiful. I mean, the colors and everything, and the characters, the stories, they were 7 minutes long. And the use of, it's funny to look back now, but the use of that camera swinging around the room, because I'd never seen anything like it. And I think because they could, they did. So the camera was like, wow. And everyone was like, whoa, because I hadn't seen it before. But it was just really well done. And it was really funny and great, again, just great characters, great stories, and eye-popping visuals. And I think that's why it was just such a phenomenon.
Totally. And it's one of those shows that has evolved through the years. And Nelvana's content, through technology and the evolution of animation and children's media, has grown over time. Looking back, what kind of technological advances in the studio and industry contributed to Nelvana's longtime success? And Robin, I'm going to start with you on this one.
You know, maybe you shouldn't start with me.
We can jump over to Eric. Maybe Eric, you're the techno guy.
Yeah, I'll take that bullet. I think one of the shout outs would be Nelnet, which was our internal web-based production management portal that we actually wrote to do Rolie Polie Olie. So its first use was to produce that show, and then it's now the tool, like, for 20 some odd years now, that the studio uses still today. to produce all shows, 2D, 3D, whatever. Back then it was a lot more geared towards 3D, obviously, but we figured out once we, managed to digitalize the 2D production workflow, we were able to start to capture all that stuff inside of that tool. And so that was, I think, a really big part of Nelvana's early success, because that was written in-house. You couldn't go buy that product. There are products now that do that are commercially available, but back then you had to build it yourself, just like the multi-plane cameras and all of that other stuff. And I want to pick up on Pat's comment about the cameras, and give a shout out, and I can't remember the episode name, but there was an episode of Rolie Polie Olie that was done as a single camera move. So it was like Hitchcock, right? At that point we were whatever we could buy, because we had done hundreds of these shows at 7 minutes a piece. You got to make hundreds of them to, go for 5 or 6 seasons. And there was a major technical challenge we had, because like the TARDIS, the Rolie Polie house is bigger inside than it is outside. And those two sets don't link together in a 3-dimensional world. So we had to do all kinds of crazy stuff when the camera flew in through the kitchen door and flew through the house and flew out through the garage door. But that was one of the shows that we did that literally was a single camera move from the opening shot all the way to the 7.5 minutes later when we finished the show.
So Eric, in terms of the 3D animation, when you've got people that are looking to create something like a house, which is like smaller on the outside when you're looking at it than the inside, from a production standpoint, what are how does it feel as a creative kind of making those challenges come to life?
Well, I think like a lot of things, they just happen in production, and it's only when somebody goes, hey, why don't we do a show where we fly the camera through the house, that we suddenly realize, oh, we've got a problem. And it's just one of those weird things that comes up when you go into this. I mean, an important thing I think to understand about Nelvana and its success is there were no manuals, there were no books, there were no things that you could go to look at to figure out how to do these productions. The team that was there had to figure it out, and they a lot of times were having to figure it out on the fly and on a budget. And that leads to all of the crazy stories you've heard so far, and probably many that will come after this, is that really it's the magic is, among other things, how we figured out how to do it in the first place. And that's when you come into these weird stories about the house being bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, and thinking, well, how could that happen? It's like, didn't these guys plan that out? It's like, no, we had to build a kitchen and a living room and 2 bedrooms, and then we had to build this exterior, and we built it, and the two didn't line up, and here we are. Now what do we do?
Totally. And in 2D animation, it wouldn't have mattered. You could have just drawn it out.
Yep.
You don't have to make these like 3D things come together.
Trust me, there were many times working with Mike, the director, and some of the animators, where they're like, can't you just put the arm here? Like, why is this such an issue? And like, I had to rig the characters. I actually built the rigs for all the Rolie Polie Olie characters, and yeah, we spent hours trying to figure out how to make the tubes flail around, and we gave them controls to make it a C and make it an S and stretch it way out and shrink it up and do all those sorts of things in order to bring some of that that kind of 2D sensibility to a show that really is moving a bunch of polygons around. So
very cool. And Robin, as an animator, what's your take on Rolie Polie Olie?
Well, I love the fluidity of it, and so Eric just talked about rigging these arms and making them, allowing them to move. That's really, really hard in CG. It's not at all easy, and so I was very impressed with the fluidity of it. That was my favorite part. I also love the simplicity of the design. I think that was partially evolved out of the limitations of CG at the time. I'm suspecting, I don't know that. And it's interesting how out of limitations you can actually make something creatively more interesting, which is what happened on Rolie Polie, in my opinion. I mean, I didn't work on the show, I just enjoyed watching it.
Totally. All right, now we're going to take a look at another clip from Ruby Gloom 2006, and then we'll be right back.
Hello, Gloomsville! Are you ready to rock? You're crashing my world with your crash.
smashing good smile, smashing my life with your smashing good style. Stashing my dreams for a good long while, bashing my heart into a minuscule pile. Stop it, stop it, stop it right now. Stop it, stop it, stop it right now.
Okay, we're back. We hope you enjoyed that little clip. So, moving into the 2000s, Ruby Gloom is another TV series that began as a drawing on a piece of paper by Martin Sue, that eventually expanded into a franchise, selling the rights to Nelvana to expand into a TV series. Robin, you directed Ruby Gloom. What was it like to direct this series?
Well, it was interesting. As see, I didn't know about the first part. I thought it came from a T-shirt. I thought there was images on a T-shirt, and so the designs were locked. I mean, we had to stick to these designs: huge heads, tiny bodies. But what I loved about it was that there was so much potential for interesting art direction. It was very dark and yet cute. So it was playing with opposites, and so we could make it look very dramatic, very theatrical, dark backgrounds with characters that pop forward. And because of the cuteness, we could have fun with music, and we had great music director Tom Sesniak, composer, and he did a fantastic job on bringing the music to life. We had interesting characters like a Doom Kitty who couldn't speak but was only a violin sound for a voice. We had the two-headed monsters, Len and Frank. It was all sort of this comedy through opposites. So it was dark, and it was, dead things, and yet it was cute and light and fun. So it was a wonderful, what was the tagline for it? The dark side of the light side, or something like that.
So today we're gonna take a time to show you the bright side of the dark side.
It was just a really great crew too, where the dynamics of everyone worked so well together. So Merlan directed it, Merlan Ridley, or produced it, and it was a lot of fun to work on.
It's fascinating to see how an idea or a drawing on a piece of paper can come to life as a TV series. Now, Robin, what do you think we can all anticipate from Nelvana in the future? I know you can't say a lot because of all these NDAs that everyone has to sign, but can you give us some teasers about upcoming projects?
Right now I'm working on a theatrical short. It's 11 minutes long, and it's an idea that I came up with, and then we've worked through it together at the studio. I can't say what it is, but it's a very sort of film noir setting with a young artist who struggles with finding her creativity. And so and it's also got a very unusual liquidy creature in it. And that's about all I can say about it. But it's going to be pretty hot stuff. I think next year it should be released. Look for it at a festival near you.
Very cool, very cool. So, if you go to TAAFI next year, maybe it'll be there.
Hopefully.
Which would be awesome. Fingers crossed. All right, moving on. We're going to talk a little bit about Hotel Transylvania, which is a series from 2017. So we're going to watch some clips from that, and then we'll be right back.
Is this all my old stuff?
Aw, the first mouse I caught. Stuart, you were so slow.
Hansel and Gretel? Ugh, so scary. I hated how those evil kids tormented that nice old witch.
Mavis, you found me! And it only took 90 years.
Okay, what's happening now?
It's me! You're Debbie. Don't you remember?
I remember.
The Fatale Corporation brings you my first ghost doll.
Debbie, you're terrible. You make me want to scream. My Debbie doll is really mean. Debbie will be your best friend forever.
Okay, we're back. Hotel Transylvania, the series, is not only a success produced by Nelvana, but is also one of Canada's treasures for Canadian animation. Robin, having won a Canadian Screen Award in 2019 and being nominated for multiple awards, including a Daytime Emmy Award, what would you say is the best piece of advice that you would give to aspiring Canadian directors in animation?
If you want to be a director, anticipate what your crew requires. So if somebody is storyboarding, they need to know the locations. They need to have characters designed. They can't make this stuff up on the fly, because it's hard enough storyboarding or animating or doing effects. So as a director, you have to think ahead and provide that information. I like to say it's called directing, not reacting. So you have to, so what I do is I take a script and I break it down and do thumbnails, all through the script, saying this is sort of just giving very quick sketches that really help the next person in line who's going to either design a location or design a new secondary character, come up with it, a basic one first as a launching point, not to restrict people, but to give them an idea of where you want to go. Because otherwise they're just sort of searching in the dark, wondering, well, I'll try this, but I have no idea if it'll work. So that's my advice.
Very good. And we discussed this earlier, production technology has changed a lot. Eric, can you tell us more about some of Nelvana's production technology milestones, like what kind of production technology advances we can expect or predict in the future for animation studios like Nelvana?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, looking back, there was the fake use of computers for animation that we learned about today, and then there was the real use of computers for animation. And we added digital storyboards, at some point during my career there. So we moved off of paper there, and cue sheets and all of those processes eventually moved into the computer. Going forward, I think there's obvious things like adapting to new resolutions like 4K and 8K. There's HDR, so high dynamic range rendering and those sorts of things to match what consumer and projection devices are able to do. And then there's you look at the advances being made in 3D and 2D animation, the quality, the amount of background characters, the motion, using artificial intelligence to fill in some of the details that normally would have had to been hand done by people. You can start to fill in, and examples of that in the 3D world are like in Lord of the Rings, where they had the armies were all procedurally generated and not hand animated. We experimented with some of that in a crude way in Santa Claus Brothers, which was a 3D direct-to-video that we did in the studio. So there were tons of scenes that had a lot of background characters, and most of that was actually done procedurally and not by people. And it's those sorts of things, so that the animators and the directors and the producers can focus on the storytelling and the getting the vision they want to the screen, and not worrying so much about the math that's going on in behind it, or the complexity of the having to know how to click this button or drag that there or whatever. So that's the direction I think you're going to see, and I think what that will result in is higher and higher and higher quality levels, a much more rapid pace of delivery. So the ability to deliver many half hours or movies or whatever per year, and make it all coordinated and doable within the kind of economics that the industry imposes.
Mm-hmm. It's an ever-changing industry. The technology has just completely revolutionized how everything's done over the past couple decades. It's really morphed and changed with computers, for sure.
For sure.
Now, Larry, what would be your advice for any young animators getting into the industry?
To study many different things. The industry changes so quickly and it's so large. It's gotten so large. When we first started in it, like the only possible outlet for animation was in our area was Nelvana or the NFB, and it was all hand drawn stuff. So look where it's gone in the short amount of time in which in our careers. It's gone in all sorts of crazy directions. So there's gaming animation, there's like product test animation, there's motion capture stuff, there's all sorts of interesting things. So don't limit yourself to just one place for the first while, and have fun and see what you like to do the most.
Now, for people who follow animation but aren't behind the scenes, what they might not know is the number of people that need to be behind the scenes that, you know, maybe drawing isn't necessarily their forte, but they want to be a part of the creative collaboration that creates these wonderful shows that we produce in Canada. And so maybe, Pat, you were a producer. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how that happens.
Well, it's interesting because for me, my path to producing was basically through, I was a cell painter. I shot rostering camera. I became a production manager, and then through managing shows and reading scripts, I became a producer and understood that part of it. And then working with directors and designers, it all becomes very collaborative. So if you're somebody who doesn't draw, doesn't necessarily want to be an animator, then there is a production route. And I know that some colleges are introducing programs for actually production management and producing, which is great. And also with the tools that they have today, with Toon Boom and other programs, you can be a designer. You could be a designer, you could be a layout artist. There's all kinds of ways that you can participate creatively. You could be an art director, you know, you could be a producer. There's other things to be besides an animator. So and it's a boom time now. It's crazy boom time, and a lot of kids coming out of the colleges are able to snap up jobs immediately. I've never seen a time like this before in my life. There's so much content, so it's a great time to get into it.
Absolutely, it's phenomenal, and helping run the TAAFI job fair, just seeing that the number of people looking for jobs and the number of companies that were looking for people to fill positions was incredible. Like, it's just like, if you want to get into animation, now is the time. You can build your career, and, you know, sky's the limit as far as that goes. Now we're going to move into the live Q&A for folks that are watching. So stay tuned, grab a coffee, and then let's have a live chat. And we're back for the Q&A. How are you guys doing?
Good.
I'll get all those mics unmuted there. All right. So we've got one question here, and it is, how have you seen characters and art evolve over the years at Nelvana? And Robin, since you were one of the first people there, I'm going to start this one off with you.
Well, let's look at Rock and Rule. Some of the characters there were quite complicated and interesting, but difficult to draw. And there wasn't a lot of, in the case of the character I was working on, there wasn't enough structure to the drawing. So I think they've evolved into a more there's a certain simplicity and sophistication to the designs that we have going now. A lot of that is influenced by the digital world and just how people draw. I mean, those old drawings were done by pencil, of course, and you had to draw in the underlying structure to a character. But now the way they design characters, it's quite different. It's you know, they're I don't know. It's just like a certain simplicity that really is stronger on the screen often. But, you know, there's a downside to that too. I mean, you know, so I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Well, I think really the technology of digital drawing in the beginning changed the design style. Everything was simplified, and There were no complex characters, and there were so many issues when we started with digital drawing, like make sure you close the lines and intersections and crap that happened. It was so annoying because it was no longer drawing. It was all about the technical directors ruled the world, and the rest of us were like, why doesn't it work? And so it was like that for a long time, but people are more savvy now, and Toon Boom, for one thing, has improved things. Flash has improved, so people are used to using it. But in the beginning, there was much less drawing, and there's still less drawing, but people know how to use the tool better now. So I think that's why.
Absolutely. And I think this will kind of flow over to Eric really nicely. So Eric, you're on the technical side. So a lot of people don't see what Pat's talking about, which is that, you do, like, say you do a little drawing, but you don't close it all together, and you take let's call it like the paint bucket tool, and you drop it into the middle, and then it should just color. You just want to color inside your object, but then it colors the whole screen. So technologically, have things become easier since you started?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. When I started in 3D, we had to type out the commands to draw a sphere here and stretch it and move it over there, and there was very little user interface, and slowly that got added, and over time, adding what Pat was referring to, the vector artwork and not closing your lines, and I remember all these discussions with angry animators and angry directors, and Larry's still mad about it, quite frankly. But
no, it just
he holds a grudge.
He's mad about
but it's true, and you can see it's so much better now. I mean, every year the tools get better, they get more intuitive, it's quicker, it's faster, and the quality level just keeps going, up, and up.
Absolutely. So Larry, I guess this is your time. You've had your time to get mad about it.
I got it. Everybody got their say. And I fixed my digital stuff. I think the one thing that going digital has brought us has been the availability to change things quickly. I mean, working on a schedule when we're drawing everything by hand and on paper and on cells, you had to live with a lot of mistakes that you would have to go, oh, that's going to go on TV. Yes, time's up. Give me that. Right? Whereas the digital stuff, so it's a plus and a con. We can change stuff, but that's brought the availability to clients to keep on changing stuff all the way through productions. So that's a difficulty in getting everything done. But like everybody else is agreeing that it does make a better project at the end of the day.
Right. Now I've got another question, kind of a follow-up on this for Robin. Robin, you worked on Rock and Rule, and when we were talking about it earlier in the show, you were mentioning that, there were a lot of revisions back and forth. And do you think, based on the technology we have and the animation technology that we're using now, would Rock and Rule have been harder or easier now?
Wow. It would be really interesting now. It would be just as expensive, if it would be more expensive, because we'd see all the potential to do this, that, and the other thing. And at the time, it was all about insanely complicated exploration of visual ideas. So, which of course made it incredibly interesting. And so if we did Rock and Rule today, we would have the same attitude. You'd have to, and it would be cost a gazillion dollars. But one thing that it would be great is that the continuity of model would be accurate, because one of the things about those old productions is that the character model would change in the hands of whoever was drawing it. So the same character would be quite different in two different hands. And that's one of the wonderful things about digital animation, is the model is built and it remains constant, and the character looks the same. It doesn't change from sequence to sequence, but that would be the best thing.
Now, Pat, you were talking about some model changes in Rock and Rule. There was a certain character at the beginning that kind of changed towards the end. Would that apply in this case?
That character may have started out with bigger attributes in the beginning. Let's just leave it at that.
Perfect. All right. So the next question is advice for getting into an entry-level production job. Larry, what would you say to a young animator trying to get into a entry-level production job?
Well, I said this in my intro, is that to have a portfolio that shows a lot of different things. Unless you are an absolute ace on that one thing, if you're an amazing animator, then have a reel that shows all that good animation, and make sure you're applying your work to the right studio. If you're going, you want to do gaming, then you got to go to a gaming place, obviously. If you want to go features, then you have to go to all those feature studios.
Mm-hmm.
But don't forget, there's lots of studios that are doing TV series and spec. If being Canada, if you still want to be an animation artist, and there are independent people that go it alone and create really fantastic films for festival circuits.
Absolutely.
And maybe they do end up on TV in certain places.
Yeah, it's a hard way to do it, but you can absolutely do it.
Especially nowadays, where everything's digital. Like you have your own studio and a laptop, that's a benefit. It used to be you'd have to, make a camera in your living room.
Yeah, totally. And when there was Spike and Mike's, that was one of the few ways you could get your stuff shown. If you were like an independent and you weren't kind of mainstream, you'd go into the Spike and Mike Festival or the Ottawa Festival, which Pat, you were saying is where you got your love for animation back in 70 what?
76.
76, the first one, right? Was that right?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So what would you say, Pat, like in terms of animators that are looking to get into the world of animation as an entry-level job, what would you recommend? Because you had a very interesting path yourself.
Yeah, but it is so different now. Today there's so much content being made, not just in studios, but for YouTube, and you can launch your own YouTube channel. There's so many ways to get into it, and I really think social media has a huge influence on how someone could break in by just posting your stuff on Facebook or wherever or Instagram, and people get noticed. And I'm seeing that happen more and more, rather than the traditional route of, I'm gonna try and get a job at Nelvana or out of college, but or Ninth Story or Guru. But I think that you have to be willing to. I think you have to be willing to go, I need to start here. I'm not going to start there, and I'll get over myself and I'll learn along the way. I think you just have to be able to accept, and maybe your first job is not really what you want to do, but you're learning along the way. And if you show that you're willing to learn and you take charge of what you're doing, you get noticed. I think it's difficult now that we're all working from home. That's not the same, but that would be my advice: is to put yourself out there and go to festivals and introduce yourself to people that work in the studio. See who's at the festival and make a meeting with them. I met so many people, especially, I'm just saying, the Ottawa Festival to me is like, I love that festival and I miss it. And not that it's not still there, it is, but I met so many students and filmmakers through there that are still my friends that I've been able to help along the way. And so that would be my advice.
Absolutely. So don't get disappointed if you put a job application in Nelvana to direct their next primetime television animated series. Maybe get an entry-level job there and kind of work your way up and through it.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, that makes sense, and that's the way it's going to go. It's we're in a crazy world now. There's a lot of competition, and you have to work your way up most of the time. You'll hear about the superstar stories where people have just shot to the top, and you're like, I want to be like that person, but that's one in 100 million, maybe, maybe less. Okay. Now the next question is about specifically working for Nelvana or pitching a show to Nelvana. Have any of you guys taken pitches for Nelvana? Larry?
I have done a pitch to Nelvana, and one of the few people that actually did a pitch, they got behind it. We did a promo, and we pitched it in Los Angeles and ended up on CBS for a season.
Wow.
It was a great show, Larry.
Thank you. And yeah, Robin helped on the promo and the opening. It was the most amazing opening ever with the bird song. This is before Family Guy did it. So the one thing I wanted to say about that kind of backtracks in our conversation was about, that those were the days in which the old stories would say, yeah, I pitched this drawing on a serviette to some network person and they loved it and got picked up. Well, Nelvana had an open house and everybody put in these amazing pitches, and Dale Schott, who was a director at the time, said to me, Larry, aren't you doing something? I don't know. I don't draw like all those other guys. And they said, no, just put in something. You'll never know, right? So I did do some funny drawings on some lined paper, and ended up getting picked up by somebody in New York. I think it was Nick at that time. And they showed interest in it. And all of a sudden, Nelvana showed a lot of interest in it.
Mm-hmm.
But, nowadays, because of what Pat was saying about social media and all the outlets in which you can show your work on social media and YouTube, you have that whole platform in which you can create your own work at home with Toon Boom or Adobe Animate, all sorts of programs that have that whole the same timeline as what we use professionally, in which you can put soundtracks. You can do a whole little promo yourself, put it online, and that's how you create a following. And hopefully somebody in a larger place that will broadcast it with some finances behind it will see that and develop it. And when you develop something also, you end up eventually having to go into partnership with a bigger company, and other people get involved. So that's a heads up to everybody, that you have to be able to share your creative. And in any production, usually animation is a collaborative effort. So you have to be able to share and know what's good, know what's not, know where to stand against something that's right or wrong.
Yeah, that word "share" is a big word, because
it's gotten me into trouble, right?
It's tough. It's tough. You have a idea that it's very dear to you, and now other people are involved, and so you have to work with those other people. I mean, there's a lot of people needed to make an animated show. So, Larry, you're absolutely right to touch on that subject, because if you don't share, then the show dies. It just doesn't happen. So you have to work with.
Now, would you guys say, I know there's people they will, and this is one of the horror, let's jump into the horror story just for our audience, because there's a lot of younger people that are viewing too. You could potentially sign away a project that doesn't get made and gets locked up in the studio system.
Yep.
So you got to be ready for that. Or maybe it's going to, sorry?
It's really tough. It's really tough when that happens, because any project that you're making, usually you put your heart and soul into it. And so, I've worked on projects for 2 years and then they die. Mm-hmm. So, that's tough, but it's just the way it is. And you can't take it too personally. You can learn from it though. And then just take that knowledge on to the next project. You definitely can learn from every project that you're working on, including the ones that are deemed failures if they don't get made. So it's just the way of the world, because there are so many factors involved, and often it is not the reason for a show not being made is not the reason you think it is. It's really complicated. So you just have to do your best and make the best show you can.
Absolutely. And we're just going to jump back to the question we were talking about, getting into animation. One of the things I've heard is that right now rigging is a good way to get in, because it's a in-demand category for people to work on. Eric, would you agree with that rigging would be a good way to get into animation and get into a company like Nelvana?
To be honest, I don't really know these days. I mean, rigging always was a complicated thing to do. It's a good skill to have. Yeah, we had modelers and riggers and lighters and, shaders and technical directors. That's all the kind of the technical side of getting things set up for 3D. And rigging can make a huge difference in how well the animators can actually pull a performance out of a model and how good it's going to ultimately look on the screen. It's a really important part, especially of 3D. But I mean, there's even 2D rigging now. I mean, they rig things inside of in Toon Boom, etc. So you're seeing a lot of those tool sets move over into that production space as well. So yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to say. I'm not really that in touch with what's going on right now with people that are coming out of school or trying to get into this career. I will say it's so different from when I started. You had to have a $30,000 Silicon Graphics workstation and a $20,000 license of Softimage or Power Animator, to be able to, or Wavefront, to do it back then. And the barrier to entry, for anybody who just wants to find out if they love doing this is so, like, you could go get Blender and a cheap PC with a good graphics card and, do the same stuff we do in the studio. So, it's just hard because it's by yourself, but you can get there was no barrier to entry, or the barriers to entry are much lower than what they used to be for somebody trying to get into this kind of a career. And combined with the amount of free tutorials and videos you can find, on the internet, that, we didn't have any of that stuff. All that stuff you can go look at now and go, okay, this is, how I build a model, how I build a character. Here's a tool I can use. Here's how to rig it. Here's how to do facial animation, on and on and on and on. And yeah, we just didn't have that. So it's a very, very different world now. And I'm sure I think it would have been a lot more interesting, had it been that way when I was getting into it. Felt like the hill was a lot kind of higher to climb back then, but I don't know. I'm sounding like an old man. I guess I'll shut up now.
I think we're all old folks here. Larry, you had your hand up?
Yeah, a entry level place at the studio, and something if we have talented drafts people out there, is storyboard. So we always need storyboard people, and if you develop yourself into a storyboard person, there's tons of work out there for storyboard people. So at Nelvana and other studios, there's storyboard revision positions, and those are entry-level positions. It's a great place to learn TV storyboard talent, and because you're working on boards that have been done with by professional people who have been in the business for a long time usually, so you can see the standard that you have to bring your drawing and cinematography up to, and also your cinematography is your visual films, visual storytelling, something that you might not have a lot of experience coming from college. You might have worked on a couple of minute show, but most of our shows are now 5 minutes to 22 minutes. So you have to learn a lot of tricks that you can use using Toon Boom and other storyboard programs, but it's usually Toon Boom.
I think you're right on with that, Larry, because storyboarding is, to me, it's my favorite part of the whole picture, and it's the most important part because it's the blueprint that holds the film together, and it's where you essentially can do the animation, composition, location design, like you're the director of photography. Really, you can look at yourself as a director in a way when you're doing storyboarding. It's just so educational and so helpful for the whole production. It's just that you have to let go of the fact that you're not working on the final piece of the puzzle. You're working on the basis for that puzzle. And so your work doesn't get up on the screen, but man, is it important. It's storyboarding is really the key to the whole process, in my opinion. So,
Pat, what other positions come up, like in crewing up on a show?
Well, everything. You always see positions for designers. That's a constant thing that's out there, besides animators. But yeah, it's mostly, and it's finding technical directors. And I'm just trying to think of all the ads that are out there now. Like, we're starting a new show. We need technical directors, lighters. Like, it's boom time now. So you're not going to know everything if you're coming out of an art college or an animation college. You're not going to know all this stuff. But I think there are so many jobs now. Honestly, there's so much content being made out there. It's boom time. So I think you just have to go after what interests you and what you think you'd be good at.
That makes sense. We're getting the red light right now.
Are we? Okay. A big...
Did I say something wrong?
But I know we were running a little bit later just because of the tech glitch there with the clips getting pulled. So I just want to say on behalf of everybody that we really appreciate you guys, taking the time to go a little bit longer so we can give the full show for our whole audience here. Love the hat, Larry, by the way. So Pat, thanks again for joining us, and Robin and Eric and Larry. It's been an absolute blast being a part of this with you guys to kind of look at Nelvana over the past 50 years, which is like this incredible achievement. And now I've got a couple final words from the guys up top. So I am going to put that here. And again, viewers, you guys have also been absolutely incredible. So this wraps up our event for the night. Thank you, Eric Flaherty, Pat Burns, Robin Budd, and Larry Jacobs for joining us for the evening and discussing Nelvana over the years. As well, thank you to the team at TAAFI and Nelvana for helping us put this event together. And lastly, a big thank you to our event sponsor, Seneca College. On behalf of TAAFI and Seneca College, we'd like to congratulate Nelvana for its 50th anniversary, which is a huge milestone. Don't forget to check out nelvana.com to hear more about upcoming 50th anniversary celebrations and to access today's recording. Notes for the panelists? You guys are great. All right, everybody. Have an amazing night.